Hi, I'm Mwenza Blell. I'm a NUAct Fellow, and I'm based in Policy, Ethics, and Life Sciences Research Center, which is in the School of Geography, Politics, and Sociology at Newcastle University. So the kind of core thing that I'm committed to with a lot of my research is to use ethnography or participant observation, so a kind of hanging out with people over long periods of time so that you get to understand their perspectives and lots of kind of the rich detail of their lives. I often combine that with other methods, and there are times that I don't use ethnography, but I just use other qualitative methods, or even do kind of secondary data analysis in a quantitative methodology. You know, in a way, anthropology has a lot of kind of research philosophy baked into it, particularly in the American tradition that I was initially trained in, where there is this idea that it's really important to get people's perspectives on their own lives, and not to kind of talk over them about what's important or about what's really going on. But I've also really been influenced by feminist research methodology and some of these things that also, I suppose, sensitize you even more to what it means to respect someone and to really listen to them. But I suppose some of the feminist methodology stuff really encourages you not to use numbers at all. And so I don't do that. I do use numbers, and sometimes I think that a quantitative approach is really important for making certain kinds of arguments, or for maybe doing strategic forms of communication that can be effective given the kind of power structures that we have, where people really don't want to listen to something that they think is less scientific or less valid, less objective. So in those cases, I think you can combine methods to make something that will be a meaningful intervention in a power structure that you know is working against you, where they think you're wrong about your life, and so they're not listening, but also not kind of sacrificing that you yourself as the researcher are listening to people and are thinking very seriously about respect and representing people's lives in ways that are not just talking over them. At the moment, I'm quite excited particularly about producing things that aren't texts. And I think this comes from the fact that I've become aware, well, it seems obvious, I suppose, that, you know, people don't read academic texts. Not many people read academic texts. You know, you spend a lot of time producing them, and then they kind of don't necessarily have any effect. And I guess this is about my personal commitment to doing things that matter, in the sense of trying to make the world more livable. And writing academic texts that people don't read is a kind of strange method for producing a better world. So it's not very effective. So I've been thinking about other ways that I can work with people, or that I can produce things that might have more, I hesitate to say impact, because impact has a particular kind of meaning to the government and to my superiors, which can often be about economic impact. But I suppose what I mean is where our message can be taken up and have a meaningful effect on the world. So that's been producing films, and right now I'm working on two. One that I'm working on kind of by myself, and another that I'm working with people in the School of Arts and Cultures. I recently worked on an art project that was producing a kind of object, something for an exhibition, with the Newbridge project, and that kind of functioned a bit more like an archive, like I was producing a visual archive, where I was bringing the work together and bringing images together and documents together in a way that I hoped would be visually impactful in a kind of emotional way to think about recent events. So I'm kind of experimenting with these ideas, and not just, I guess, listing facts or making a simple argument. I suppose a lot of my initial inspiration came from people in biological anthropology, which is what I started studying, who did things like use quantitative methods to demonstrate kinds of bias that were harming people. So like the way that all of the kind of knowledge of the human body that had been kind of generated in some areas, like particularly reproductive health and reproductive function, were based on a really small group of people who were really strange when we consider what human beings are kind of overall as a species globally. And so because they were anthropologists, they traveled around the world and collected data from a wider group of people to say, you know, as medical doctors, you're basing a baseline view of normal on white American women in the 20th century. And that's a strange place to start from, because those people are an outlier in humanity in so many different ways. And so they kind of generated the data that shifted that, or which tried at least to shift that perspective to being one that's based on kind of everybody and not a kind of group of people taken as the norm when they're not statistically normal. So I found that quite inspirational. But that's also derived from the origins of American anthropology in the work of Franz Boas, who again used quantitative methods, created biological anthropology as a kind of idea in some ways in the American tradition as a way of trying to fight racism using science, using the science of biology. So for example, demonstrating that immigrant children were not less intelligent and inferior biologically at a time when this was taken for granted by the people who benefited from that taken for granted assumption, which was untrue. So I think those were the original inspirations. I would have told them it's worth getting more cross-training than you're being offered or than's being suggested, because I think it's really, really important to kind of have a really strong grasp on, you know, how you do the kind of more standard things, you know, quantitative and qualitative methods in social science. But that isn't the limit of everything. It's really important to know how to produce an analysis that's valid and can get published, because if you can't do that, that's a real problem for you as a researcher. But being able to operate outside of that, outside of just the standard ways of doing things, I think is really important. So it's H. Russell Bernard's Research Methods for Anthropology, and it's a very thick book in many, many editions. And I think he just really calmly goes through all kinds of possibilities and really, like, you know, he takes the kinds of topics that if you try to pick up an article about epistemology or sampling or something, you can really easily get lost, either in things that go really deep into philosophy or things that go really deep into kind of statistical modeling. As a text that's just user-friendly, it's really user-friendly. And I think that's really great, rather than losing people while they just really, you know, sit there with a dictionary trying to figure out what is this about. Like, he does a good job of making a book you can just pick up and read and actually understand what's important and what you should be thinking about, right? When you're thinking about, okay, well, what methods should I choose to use? What are the implications of the methods I choose?